March the 13th. It is 9 a.m. Welcome. The public may participate in person or remotely by utilizing our web link and telephone conference links, *9 to raise hand, *6 to speak. Individuals are limited to 1 3-minute comment period for any item. Please keep your comments specific to the current agenda item. Chat is not supported. What we normally do now is introduce our commissioners. I'll start to my right. Logan.
Good morning, Logan Camporiali.
Lonnie Edwards. Wayne Brokaw.
Good morning, Pete Rayner.
Stephen Pohl. Clyde Hazy will not be available today. Is Melissa going to show up today? Is she? Maybe later? Okay. Okay. Well, we have a quorum nonetheless, and away we go. Scott, I will turn the floor over to you if you have any preliminary comments to make, into introductions, if you know what I mean, and then we'll go on to the open forum.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have an introduction to make. After a long search, we have found a clerk. We have completed our team. I'd like to introduce you to Rona Smith, who's joining us officially on Monday. And she's here today to see what she's gotten into, and hopefully she still shows up on Monday after today. We are glad to have her. She comes with a great deal of experience. She's been at the county, most recently with IT. And so it brings somebody in that knows a lot about how business is done here. And you all know how complicated this can get, but having that experience, I think, is going to be really helpful for us. So welcome aboard. Welcome, Rona. Would you like to spend about 20 minutes talking to us about your background, or you have the floor? Okay.
That's a good start.
That's a good. Welcome. Glad to have you. Thanks, Scott. Next order of business is open forum. This is the part of the meeting where we receive public comment on any item that is not NOT on the current agenda. So I will open that floor up right now for anyone in the audience or anybody online. And Ron, if you'll keep me apprised of anybody raising their hands. Okay. With that said, let's move on. We have a couple of workshops, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Scott Chesney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we're here to delve into the first, as I say, the weeds of the comprehensive plan. Some of the elements that you've been hearing about for the last few months are now starting to become better formed and shaped for consideration. We're going to talk about our land capacity analyses. We have now received those draft reports from the other communities. Those are being prepped for the steering committee, which follows us or meets next Wednesday, and they'll have a chance to ask the communities about how they've done their work. So we're going to give you a little preview on that. And then the housing allocation issues. Again, you've been part of that at the 50,000 foot level. We're now kind of down to making those allocations by income band, and that's going to have implications both on the math of projections and also the geography. It's the, what is it going to happen and where is it going to happen? So we're going to go through a couple of those. We hope we get some good comments and questions from you. And this is really a truly interactive portion. Our team will be leading you through that, but jump in anytime with questions, don't hesitate. And we're going to start off with Graham, who's going to walk through the land capacity analysis.
Am I able to click with this? All right. Perfect. All right. So this table in front of you, I believe you may have seen this before, but this is the Board of County Commissioners adopted population allocations for each of the jurisdictions in Spokane County, Spokane County's land included. These are what we measure the land capacity analysis results against. So you can see this is based on the OFM medium projection from 2023 to 2046. And you can see that first line. Does this have a laser on it? No. Oh, well, that would have been nice, but it's okay. That very first row up there where you see Spokane County whole, you can see the and you see new population by 2046 in that second to last column. It indicates that there, in total, all jurisdictions combined, are projected to be 100,000, just over 100,000 people added to Spokane County's population. And then all of the rows below that in that second to last column show the projected addition broken down by jurisdiction. So you can see the unincorporated inside the UGA only. So that's all of the Spokane County UGA land. Just over 30,000 people are projected to move to those areas. And that's just as an example. You can see that that's kind of broken down for all the cities. So city of Spokane, you can see they've got 20, just between 23,000 and 23,500 people that are projected to move there. Yeah, all based on this OFM medium projection. So this next slide contains some of this information from that last table, but it also includes most, if not all, of the dwelling unit and population capacity results for each jurisdiction. I believe the only thing missing from this table is the rural county. Everything else should be included here. These results are still preliminary, meaning they still could change. However, this is just sort of the state of things as they currently are with each jurisdiction's land capacity analysis. So you can see the main takeaway would be in that very bottom row. You can see the running totals. It's highlighted in green, and you can compare them to the allocations. So those first two columns, the orange and the purple one there. Those are the capacities, and then we would measure those against the allocations. So you can see, for example, in Spokane County, we have identified that we have capacity for 11,062 units, whereas we are allocated 17,142 units. So we are under capacity for our dwelling units as well as our population. You can see 24,460 versus 30,528, indicating that we have about a 6,000 person deficit in terms of our capacity when we compare it to that OFM allocation. Conversely, you can see with the city of Spokane, they identified in their land capacity analysis that they have capacity for 63,301 people, whereas they were only allocated 23,357. So that's just kind of how to read this. That's just kind of how to read this table, and then you can see at the bottom, in total, because when we look at we have to kind of look at capacity of the UGA as a whole, and so that total indicates that the UGA as a whole has capacity for just over 125,000 people, whereas the allocation for the UGA was just over 95,000. And so that's just a little bit of just to keep everybody on the Planning Commission updated on the current state of each jurisdiction's land capacity analysis.
Graham, can I ask you a
Yes.
question? Maybe this is just rudimentary and I'm not getting it, but how do you, the allocation,
Mhm.
how is that determined? Is that a percentage of growth or something, or somebody's estimate of, is that subjective or is that objective? Maybe how does that?
Yeah, so it was broken down. So there's the Office of Financial Management has projection data for each county. And we adopted the medium projection, which added about 100,000 people total to the county. The way that was broken down by jurisdiction was
Right.
by looking at past growth trends for each community and then extrapolating those out 20 years or so. And then sort of normalizing those so that each person's allocation added up to that total.
Liberty Lake has 0.
Liberty Lake.
Is that right?
Liberty Lake
Yeah.
has 874. Latah, the one above it, has 0.
Oh, okay.
And that second part, the extrapolation by jurisdiction, is that something that OFM did as well, or is that something that the technical advisory committee did, the PTAC or whatever?
That was, so are you talking about the capacity numbers, those first two orange and
Yeah,
blue
so
columns?
OFM gave us, we adopted the
Mhm.
median number from OFM, but it sounded like that was at a county-wide level. Then we broke it down by jurisdiction. Was that something OFM did, or is that something we did at the county level?
So we did that. That was a PTAC exercise.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Did we get any, it doesn't look like it, if I'm remembering numbers correctly. But there was some question about the city of Spokane's allocation, and did it make sense, especially since they didn't consider their new housing rules? Has there been any clarity there, or are we in the same place we were 2 weeks ago?
To the question of whether they included their new housing rules, they did not. But so I could you just repeat that question one more time, just so I make sure I understand?
Let me jump in, if I could. This is not yet a leap to actual growth itself. This is a mathematical exercise on what capacity is there.
Yes.
There are several reality checks that happen after this. One is infrastructure, one is the political capacity to do this. So that has not yet happened. These are simply the numbers that all the jurisdictions say, based on our assessment of our vacant land and our current regs, this is what we can handle.
Cool, that makes sense. Thanks.
Were there any other questions?
I mean, just as a matter of reference, I'm having a difficult time reading these things at this angle, but that's Logan has the best place to look at him because he's
Gotcha.
further away. He's head on. So we're going to count on you, Logan, to keep us the line.
I think it is in our files online. It is a little easier to zoom in on it there.
Yeah, I do believe this should be available on the web.
All right.
All right. If there are no more questions, I'm going to turn it over to colleague
Melissa.
Tate Andre. And he's going to give a bit of an update for you guys on the housing allocation. And I suppose just one last thing to just mention. So that housing allocation number there is based on the HAPT tool from Commerce. And that's something that Tate will be giving you guys an update on. So I'm going to leave it over to him. Thank you.
Hello. All right. So since Graham briefed you on the LCA data and where we're at, I'm going to dive into the housing allocation work, brief you on the housing for all planning tool first. So this is the tool provided by Commerce. It what projects our housing needs out by those income levels. It assigns overall percentage share of the countywide housing growth to us in every jurisdiction. And that percentage is assigned based off of our population allocation percentage, but there's actually an equation that converts that population to housing units, because population and housing units isn't a one-to-one. So what that ends up with is that we get 23% of the countywide housing unit share, which equals to about 17,000 units, which is then broken down by those AMI brackets. Those AMI brackets are based on persons currently in that bracket, as well as underproduction of housing for those currently cost burdened or homeless.
Okay. AMI.
Oh, I'm sorry. AMI is area median income for the county. Important note on here is you can see that the rural didn't get allocated anything from 0 to 50. And that is because it is typically seen that housing types that can meet the needs for those incomes require urban services. And so because of that, they don't get assigned to the rural areas. So I'm going to go through the steps to look at what our capacity is to meet those housing needs. And I want to reiterate that this is a draft. It is still something being worked on internally with the county, quality checked with our consultant group, as well as Commerce. We're meeting with Commerce next week to go over this and make sure everything's solid as we go forward. But the first step is to break down our LCA by zone. And that is essentially just filtering the LCA data that Graham produced down to our zones. So the most important columns here are the furthest left and the furthest right. The furthest left is the zone and the furthest right is our total capacity within that zone. So in the LDR zone, we have a capacity for about 7,200 units. MDR has about 1,100. You can go down. The highest capacity is in our LDR zone, and that is because it's due to the high percentage of the overall available acreage being in the LDR zone compared to everything else. It's not because of the density of the LDR zone. It is also important to note that there are caveats for our light industrial and commercial zones. The light industrial was assigned capacity, but that is only because of grandfathered plats that happened in a time window where we allowed that. We don't allow residential use in the light industrial zone. For the commercial, there is a very high market factor of 85%. That is because when we look at past development in those commercial zones, only about 15% of it was actually residential use. So that's why we apply such a high market factor to the net developable land to get our capacity there. So the second step is assigning zones to AMI categories based off of the housing types allowed in said zoning category. It is seen that single family homes rarely, if ever, meet below 100% AMI at market rate, while as middle housing types such as duplexes, townhomes, triplexes, quadplexes have the potential to meet below that. On the other hand, apartments are able to meet that 50 to 80% AMI. They rarely, again, if ever, dip below that. And honestly, even meeting 50% AMI isn't super common. And obviously, apartments can be much more expensive than 80% AMI. But because they have the capability to meet that, that's why they're assigned to that AMI bracket.
Excuse me,
Yes.
you don't mention condominiums. Is that just included in the apartment classification?
Pete?
Or row housing, maybe?
Yeah, row housing is townhomes. In terms of condos for home ownership, I actually don't know how that would be accounted for. We don't break it down by. Go on.
The distinction is, the condo is an ownership description, not a physical description.
Okay, all right.
These are structural.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
descriptors.
assumed that, but that always gets me in trouble.
Right, so any multifamily could be condo, any
Okay,
townhome
right,
could
okay.
be condo.
Okay,
We're also reflecting the fact that, I mean, not to get off track, but the condo law in Washington is
Sucks.
still very difficult to work with, so.
Yeah.
lawyers.
We're making these as assumptions that the multifamily is gonna stay rental, at least in this period.
So the last thing to note here is apartments assigned that 50 to 80% in terms of the market rate ability. But it also is seen that it can meet that gap of 0 to 50 if there is adequate subsidies or incentives to meet that. What we're talking about here, though, is a land use allowance. So we don't have to zone for apartments that only meet 0 to 50%. It is seen more as a broad income range type that apartments are able to meet if the incentives or vouchers are there for it. So because of this, in our LDR zone, we allow up to row housing, which actually gets that zone in that moderate income. So that's why it goes from moderate to high. Whereas our MDR, HDR, mixed use and commercial zones allow up to apartment units based off of the densities allowed and the building heights. And so what we end up with is LDR being assigned 80 to 100%, while all those other zones get assigned to the 0 to 80% AMI. The final step is combining those two tables together to get our analysis. So the first thing we do is add up our aggregate housing needs inhapped by those AMI brackets. We add up the capacity by zone assigned to those brackets, and then we subtract the capacity from the housing need. So if you add up all the brackets in 0 to 80%, we get 11,700 units needed there. Where if you add up the capacity, we get a little under 4,000 units. Thus, in those AMI bracket category, we have a deficit of about 8,000 units. On the other hand, the LDR zone has a capacity of 7,240 units, while the needs there are less than that. And so we actually have a surplus of housing in that category, about 1,800. And so in total, we end up with about a 6,200 unit deficit. So like I said before, the reason we have such a high capacity in the LDR zone is because such a high percentage of the available land is LDR. So I'm going to go quickly through our largest UGAs just to visualize this. But in the Valley UGA, 95% of it is low density residential. In the West Plains, it's 94%. And the North Metro, it's 69%. And that is due to 27% being mixed use, and that's mostly located in the Meadworks area. And in the 7 Mile UGA, 90% of it is LDR. And so when we talk about how to address this deficit of 6,200 units, we know we're going to have to make land use and zoning changes. And these changes might look like increasing our zoning, allowing more housing types. While we allow townhomes in LDR, we could add additional middle housing types to that zone or any other zone, or adjust all our zoning to allow for a broader range of things. Director Chesney's talked about incorporating a lot of more mixed use elements to meet these needs. But there's a lot of strategies that we can do. Also looking at affordable housing incentives and building those more into our development code, as well as looking for any additional development area as needed as we look at our growth scenarios and alternatives and evaluate the UGAs more. So all that to say, the housing requirements are going to play a significant part in our alternatives going forward for our environmental impact statement and all the growth we're going to have. So that's all I have on housing. This is our timeline that I'll leave up there for y'all to look at, but I'm also here for any questions on the housing analysis.
Hi, this
Hi.
is Melissa Whitstruck. I do have a question. Remind me again what the Spokane County AMI is currently?
The household, overall household is about $70,000 a year. I think it might be like 73 to be exact. There is like some nuances to that though, because there is differences between a 1-person household AMI and a 2-person. But when we look at what we're comparing it to, it's about 70,000.
And Spokane County does have a significant transfer payment population, so senior citizens that are on fixed income, which is below 70,000. Probably you can see that from people applying for property tax exemptions based on their senior status and lower income ability. I'm just wondering how the 2020 census information figured into this, because you mentioned that rural areas, or what are considered rural areas, were being excluded from absorbing, not excluded, but not necessarily figured into the capacity for new housing. There is a significant population in those rural areas that are living under the $70,000 AMI. So I'm just trying to figure out, yes, they do need urban services, but how did that census information get incorporated folded
Yeah.
into?
Okay, that's a large question. So in the way the 2020 census data was incorporated was, as Graham described, there's the growth population assigned to that overall. We get assigned a population percentage to us. That is put into the HAPS tool, essentially, that then says how many units do we need based off of this population. And that accounts for people in a certain income bracket. It accounts for people that meet below the 70% AMI as well. That's how those housing units are distributed there. To address the, I guess, income bracket in the rural areas, it is sort of a tough question to answer because there are people that are poorer in rural areas that need things to serve them. But when we're talking about housing types to meet that AMI bracket, we're talking about apartments, and apartments aren't really suitable to put out in rural areas. The way we can plan for those income bands in the rural areas would be things like we know we are going to have more ADUs that can possibly accomplish some of the lower income stuff. There are vouchers that can still go out to rural communities. I'm trying to think of any other things. I'm sorry, I'm spacing on all the strategies we can use to tackle like rural issues. But in terms of allocating housing types and planning for land uses based off those housing types, it isn't something that we can really assign out there because of the density required, if that makes sense. Okay. The housing allocation and the bracket stuff gets a little bit convoluted at times, and it is something that we're working through, and you kind of just have to work with what you got in terms of the housing allocation and breaking it down.
And if we wanted to veer from the median income and the HAPS tool, we had to like come up with our whole justification for doing so and be able to defend it, correct? It's pretty tenuous thing to do, it seems like. We should probably just take what the state gave us and work with it. At least that's my opinion.
That is true. And with the housing allocation, like you said, it's something we have to meet. Doesn't mean we can do more. So we can always get creative and plan for strategies like what you bring up with the rural areas. There's always things we can do beyond just zoning for additional housing types to meet these brackets.
There's other things we can do and we can do them better.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there any other questions for me? All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Tate. Thanks, Graham. Couple to follow up kind of conversation. Remember, the Growth Management Act is designed to promote urban planning. It's designed to move everything they can inside of a growth area boundary. It all but virtually ignores the rural side of the equation. And so what we're doing now is going through that urban allocation, recognizing that the OFM number has at least 4,000 residents coming into that, projected to come into our non-UGA areas. No other planning department in the county focuses on rural areas, only the county itself. And so as we go through this exercise, we will start to break off and have another parallel track on working on our rural allocations, which will be everything from, very low density development up to working ag farms, working in even large lot residential. There's a huge delta in income and housing values. And once you get in those rural areas, like literally 0 to, 200% AMI easily.
It's the Growth Management Act doesn't like manage that portion. Is there like another state oversight body that manages, or do we just kind of get to do what we want in our rurals in certain bounds of state law?
No, the ability of counties and cities to do what they want ended with the Growth Management Act. And at the time that was valid because it was pretty ad hoc around the state. GMA needs a serious look for where it's grown in 30 plus years. There are still there are significant parameters to how the rural areas are handled. They don't start so much at planning for growth as they do resource protection and work back from that. So taking land out of an STA, a small tract ag or a large tract ag, is a very difficult thing to do because the Growth Management Act explicitly protects those lands. And so it comes at the rural side from really the land side as opposed to the growth side, which the inference is we want less growth here. We want to protect the land and put less development out here. And yet in a county, we have to accommodate for a market that wants to have rural living. And so that's the balance we have to put together that we can defend under the GMA. And, Tate mentioned things like ADUs. There are more and more, there are creative options for less expensive housing, ADUs, tiny homes, what used to be called park models, manufactured housing. Most of that is being actively prohibited by current legislation at this year's legislature. It'll be the second consecutive session that there was a proposal out to prohibit counties from allowing detached ADUs in rural areas. We currently allow them in our code. You can have an attached or a detached ADU in our rural zones. The bill being pushed by FutureWise would shut that avenue off completely. And the rationale is that's sprawl. That'll double our rural population instantly, and it will have a detrimental effect on water. I think that's a little bit of an overreach. And again, taking that tool away from counties at the state level is anathema to the idea of planning at the most local level for the people who are here. But that bill is still alive and very likely has the support to pass. That will be a big hindrance. I mean, unless we can find ways to address the concerns that are being put out there, that will be a hindrance to us having any semblance of an affordable, ownable property in our rural areas. So we're dealing with legislation all the time now that is tightening and tightening and tightening the Growth Management Act and taking more and more decisions away from you and making them in Olympia.
Do you know the number off top, Scott?
I don't. I'll get that to you though.
Thank you.
So those were the main topics we had for you today. If you think of other things and questions, you know how to reach us. Throw them in an email, and we will continue to put this together. We'll build toward our next meeting and keep moving on these things.
Question?
Just a quick question. I suppose there may or may not have been a survey done on how many of these accessory dwelling units, attached or detached, allowed in the rural areas might be being used as short-term rentals and events, locations. So I think that that's an important thing because those don't become dwelling units.
Right. Because it gets complicated and it gets a little messy.
Still, when it's your own property, you should be able to do within law what you want, as long as you're keeping it clean. I build a lot of ADUs for other people when they hire my particular company to build homes. And an ADU, detached or attached, we need to be able to keep that in here. We need to be able to fight legislation on that because we do keep getting hammered by our state laws, and it's making home ownership here unaffordable. I know a ton of people that want to move in their in-laws right next door that might be, need handicap stuff, entrances, things like that. People want to be able to take care of their families and, not go out and spend outside for outside care, because a lot of people can't afford it. So we need to figure out how to be able to keep that stuff.
Your statement is absolutely accurate because you had within the law. That's the constraint we're having because that law is not being determined by the local needs by you making recommendations to our elected officials. It's being made on a statewide basis that has to apply to everybody. And to summarize FutureWise's position, and maybe it was a little pejorative before, but their position is simply that new growth should happen inside cities where these facilities are already in place. And adding a rural ADU is saying you should really, that growth should be in the cities. They're simply not looking at families that want to be intergenerational or other things like that, or at least they're not considering it that way.
What about some of these farmers that are outside, that don't want to live in the city, but still want to take care of part of their other family members? We have to consider that.
Current Spokane County code allows a detached ADU in our rural areas. So that very instance of, I'm getting old, my kids are, either want to take on the farm or I want to sell it to somebody, but I don't really want to move here. Can I put myself in an ADU? Right now, we can do that. If the legislation goes forward, when we update our 26 plan, it will be prohibited.
One of the things in the packet, talked about like public sites being eliminated from the available land. And it kind of suggests that it's only sites that were previously identified. And so I'm curious if there are also like some land removed for sites that haven't yet been identified, parks or schools that we know we're going to need, but we don't yet have like the spot owned by the school district or the city or the county. Were those not removed from the analysis, or was some allocation made for that?
At this stage, no. We're looking only at what we already have legally, so to speak, on the books in terms of property ownership records. What you're describing, though, is one of the next iterations of this. How do we get more and more fine-grained where we have a better sense of what's actually there to develop and what could be an institutional use in the future, or even if it's not reserving it on a parcel specific level, which would be a little premature, recognizing that in that West Plains UGA, we need to leave room for 1 or 2 or 3 school sites somewhere as that grows. And that's the whole point of that placemaking side, is knowing what you're going into ahead of time allows you to say, if we're going to have these subdivisions, we need to make accommodation for retail, for services, for amenities, for schools, and probably a fire station, something else that happens. If you don't do that now, you end up with this patchwork of subdivisions, and then there's no room to shoehorn in the things that people want to see, so they end up on long drives to get there.
So that part will be kind of in our infrastructure phase of analysis
Yes.
for capacity.
Yep.
Just on a very specific note, but I saw the county commissioners did acquire some more land near Fish Lake, which will be a pretty accessible park well, it already is an accessible park resource for West Plains folks, but will be a better park resource in an area where there's not a lot of park resources for county residents. So that's great.
Yep, that's true. And also recently, the county acquired a 10-acre site immediately adjacent to the UGA and building a community park. So those pieces, they can happen by lucky serendipity, but we're trying to, we're in the planning business. We're supposed to anticipate and forecast and be ready for those things.
And one last question, sorry. So there's the land capacity analysis, but is carrying capacity also figured into this yet? Or will that be in the finer grain, like West Plains has got finite ability to provide water, sewer out in the blue basalt areas?
Right. No, it's not there yet. That is, in a sense, that is one of the immediate next steps, is to turn this mathematical capacity into something, is how much of it can be realistically built or affordably built. There's no problem with water and sewer on the West Plains. It's just expensive to fix. And if that turns a $300,000 house into a $500,000 house, what is that really a solution? Or should you be making different accommodations for that or a different kind of circumstance? So it's all about choices and being able to bring capital facilities in to support the growth that's being planned and projected.
This report is really clear and easy to understand. So kudos to the authors of the LCA report.
Thank you. We have a good staff. Told you that. Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
Is that it? All right, thank you. That's splendid presentation today. Thanks for everybody's hard work. Go to the next item. Approval of the minutes. February 27th, 2025. Everyone has a copy of those. Are there any additions, corrections, or notations on that? If not, this chair will entertain a motion to adopt these minutes of February the 27th. So moved by Pete.
Second.
Second by Logan. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by saying nay. Those minutes are hereby adopted. The next meeting is April the 3rd, but before we do that, I always turn the floor over to Mr. Chesney for any closing remarks or encouragement or what's going to happen in the next meeting or what have you. You have the floor, sir.
The benediction.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Make it strong.
We do. I mean, we're starting to flesh out the calendar of activities for the rest of 25. We will be sharing some of that with you at your next meeting. Notably, that involves linking up the environmental impact statement early work, which is called scoping, in these next 60 days with the placemaking and with some of the other work that's been done to produce what are a series of alternatives for study in the EIS. There will likely be 3 or maybe 4 of those alternatives. One's called a scenario 0, which is if you do nothing, what does your growth look like with your existing zoning, existing plan, existing development regs? Another will be, how do we look with this placemaking concept, changing our zoning into something that is more permissive, but is more performance-based? What does that do to affect our environmental impacts? A third will look clearly at an expanded UGA if it's warranted. And that's going to, at least at the study level, it will look at what we have now in the urban reserve lands, which were those forecast by our predecessors to be in the next line of growth, and say what, the analysis it starts from a big picture. What if all of that urban reserve was ready to grow? What would it take to serve that for capital facilities? What would be the environmental impacts? And so you'll end up with at least this very wide range of options. We will share that with you, and then we will be asking the board to give some direction on narrowing that down to one of those for more detailed study. And we're leaving open that there could be a 4th alternative that may be somewhere in between the very broad aspects. So that will all be happening pretty much now through the first part of June. We expect to be ready to go with those scoping meetings by the end of May. Secondly, and I guess last, on Monday, we have a slide for you. The Growth Management Hearings Board met on Monday, or I should say issued an order on Monday based on our testimony from January 28th on the last remaining case that keeps us out of compliance, which is the CPA 1604 case that you have had a chance to weigh in on, and your predecessors back to 2016. They held in the county's favor. And so the bottom line is, for the first time in 20 years, Spokane County is in compliance with the Growth Management Act.
Wow, that's exciting. Scott, could you remind me, is this sort of like the creative solution the county came up with involving a cemetery and sort of moving some things around? Is that right?
Well, this is the end of, I think, 7 separate litigations, 7 separate court cases that were wrapped into the settlement agreement in 2016. Since 21, planning and legal have been working with FutureWise, sometimes through mediation, sometimes individually, to chip away at satisfying each of those criteria. And there were dozens of them to reach each of those cases. This was the last one, and it was challenged on, as you remember in the report, it was challenged on SEPA. It was challenged on the nearness qualities in our own plan. We went back and readdressed those. It was also found out of compliance because at the time, Spokane County was not linking its capital facilities plan to its comprehensive plan. So we fixed that in 23, pull all these pieces together, and the board said, yes, you satisfied all of the criteria that we found in 2016, and therefore this order is dismissed.
Thank you. I'm glad I gave you this extended time to
Thank you.
make those comments. Great. Anything else?
And I know she's departed us, but kudos. I suspect Jessica Pilgrim had a lot to do with getting
Absolutely.
this across the finish line.
Absolutely.
So kudos to her for her work in getting us here.
Jess was online when we announced this to the board on Monday. And yes, this was her, she was driving this show. We had it was planning and legal, but Jess jumped in when she joined us, right when I came here, same in 21. And she ramped up to speed and just ran with this thing constantly. And her tenaciousness is what kept us in the game and ultimately got us across the line.
Thank you for that acknowledgement, Logan. That was nice.
Mr.
Before,
Chairman, that's all I have.
thank you very much. I will give one more opportunity for anybody on the commission who would like to say anything, and we will then, yes, sir.
I'll just say the city, if you live in the city is starting its sort of series of workshops, like the county did, trying to elicit feedback. They've already done 2 of them, I think. There was one yesterday I went to, but there's 2 more. So if you live in the city and you want to engage in the city's process, the time is now.
Good point, Logan. I appreciate that because ultimately the county has to weigh in on all of the jurisdictions' comprehensive plans.
Yeah, on that note, I'm sure, I don't know as well, but I'm sure the city of Spokane Valley and those cities are also soon to embark on their public engagement. So if you live in those cities, check in with your planning department.
Anyone else? If not, the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
So moved by Logan, second by Melissa. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by saying nay. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. It
Thank
is
you, everyone.
9:45.